assembling this adult trike by iGlobal Buy. And first thing you want to do is get all your tools together. Once you've got all your tools together, open the package up, make sure all the parts are there. Once you have all the parts there, separate them out. I would recommend getting a small container to put all your screws in, so it's easy to find which ones are which, so that you can start assembling. There's some little tricks you can do that would help. If you had some car stands, for example, you could raise the back end up and it would make it a lot easier to assemble. But we're going to pretend that we don't have any car stands, so we're just going to do it the hard way. Alright, to install your derailleur, you have a little tab back here off the rear axle that you hook it into, and there's a little clip that meets right into here to keep your derailleur from turning. So you just line those up, drop your screw in, get your appropriate sized Allen wrench, and you want to give this a good tightening so it's not going to fall off on you. Alright, that's good and tight. Now your back axle will now fit into your front axle. So what we're going to do here is line the bike up, turn it upside down, and you have 4 bolts that go into place. You have 2 slots here, and then 2 bolt spots here. What I recommend is get them started on both the bike main frame and on the rear axle, so that you can just slide them in and get it locked in place, and that way you can start screwing everything down. So you can just do it that way. That's the easiest way. Set it back so it's sitting on the back side. Drop it down into place, and then it should be all lined up. And as you're holding it there, keep some pressure on it, because you want to keep your back axle square. If you don't have your back axle square, you'll cause your bike to go down the road sideways. So kind of hold it in place. While you got it held into place, what you're going to do is just tighten up one side, one bolt first, just so it's snug. You don't want to over tighten it yet at this point. Okay, once it's snug, then you don't want to tighten the second bolt on that side because you'll cause it to be crooked. So come over to the other side. You can lean this bike back a little bit if you need to. Get it snug, and then I will set it back on the end again and put some pressure down on it. Go back to your first bolt, tighten it up a little bit. So it's good and snug. Come back to the second side, tighten that up so it's good and snug. And then you can tighten the last two bolts and you don't have to worry about it shifting. Tighten that to snug it. Go to the other side, do the same thing. And these you do not have to over tighten. Once they're in place, they're not going to loosen up with these lock nuts. You just want to get them fairly tight, but you don't have to crank on them so tight that you're like trying to break them. Alright, I got that one snugged up. We're going to go ahead and tighten it up. Tighten this other one up. Check the front two. Alright. Now we're going to run our chain through our derailleur. Pull on that a little bit. So you can extend this over the front sprocket and get that on the smallest gear, which is your 6th gear. And I can get it all the way around there. So we're going to try that again. So, pull on your front derailleur, put this over the pedal. Make sure it's completely on there. So over the small sprocket in back, over the front derailleur, and as you can see, it now works. And as you also notice, the axle's not turning. That's because we don't have that cotter pin adjusted yet. Alright, so we got that in place. What we'd like to do now is start running some of your cables. We're going to work on the cables next and the handlebar. Cut there for a second, Connor. Alright, once you get to that point, we now need to start working on the rear axle to get everything lined up. If you look at the axle here, you'll notice this piece here. This is your actual drive cog. And this needs to be butted up against this bearing here. So this is where your rubber mallet comes into play. Just take it, just lightly tap on it until that goes all the way over. Once that's all the way over, it's lined up perfectly. Now we're going to move back to the back side over here, and we're going to show you the wheel sprocket. Now the wheel sprocket, we need to also line it up. And if you notice, I don't know if you can see in here or not, this is showing a little bit of a gap. What we want to do is we want to get that lined up. So we're going to slide that over, get that lined up perfectly. And you'll see there's a screw here. This is all tightened by an Allen key. And you just want to get that to the point that it's right up against it. It doesn't have to be super firm up against it, but just kind of so there's maybe like a width of a piece of paper, just barely loose. And then just give that a good tighten. Okay. I'm also going to do the same on the brake drum here. there's a band that actually grabs a hold of this drum and squeezes down on it to stop the back axle. So we're just going to line that up, same way, get it in there nice and tight. And we're going to tighten that screw up. And you want to get these good and tight. Okay, now that should work. We'll go ahead and turn this, make sure everything's working here. And as you can hear, you hear that little bit of dragging. We're a little too tight on one of these. And I'm going to think it's going to be the brake, so I'm going to loosen that up just a little bit, because it looks like my brake is just a little bit maybe out of alignment. So I'm going to just loosen that up just a little bit. I'm going to pull that out just a hair and retighten that up. Now it's nice and quiet. And then your brake will grab a hold of the rear axle here and stop the rear axle, so I can't turn it. Alright, so we've got that all into place. We've got your gears so that the chain is right now on the smallest gear, which is where we want it. We've got the front on here. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and put the pedals on. You have two pedals for your bike, obviously. One pedal is for one side and the other pedal is for the other side. You cannot switch them. You have to have the right pedal for the right side. They're threaded exactly backwards from one another. So we grab the right pedal here. If it's not, it won't even start to thread. Just try it with your finger. If it doesn't start threading, then it's got to be the other pedal. Once you get the pedal on, just lightly, loosely tighten it with your hands. And grab a right size wrench, which in this case here, this is a number 15. Just give that a good tighten, and the pedal will turn. Go on the other side, we'll do the other one. And this one on this side, on the left-hand side, is actually a backward thread. That's so that when you're pedaling, if the pedal would decide to start to come loose, it's actually not going to fall off on you while you're pedaling. It's designed to be basically self-tightening. Alright, we got that one nice and tight. So both of the pedals there. And our assembly's now all working. So now we need to run some cables. So that'll be our next step. We're going to run some cables. So let me get the handlebars and the cables and we'll get started with that. It helps when you have your wrenches handy. Back up. And at this point, you don't have to overly tighten it. You just kind of want to get it tightened up enough that it's going to hold in place. And because you're going to adjust all this stuff, it may not be perfectly straight, may not be the perfect height. You just kind of want to get it straightened up. Same way with the handlebars, just adjust those and tighten them up a little bit. We'll slide that back a little bit. Alright, so we have our gear assembly already in place. Now I'm going to put my brake assembly in. And like I said, it's got a larger lug on here. Some people have a tough time with this, but it's pretty easy. You have your little piece where the cable hooks into. It's got a slot on the top and it rotates. Just rotate it back Put that in place, let it drop there, and there's a slot in the top. Now when you get to here, there's a nut and a larger like bolt. They have a slot in them, so you have to turn it to the point where you can get the cable to drop down through. And once it's through, just turn the nut to hold it in place. That way the cable can't come back out. Now we've got those cables in place, and we're going to go ahead and hook them up in the back. So we're going to show you to the different places we're hooking up here in the back. Okay, now we're back at the rear end of the bicycle here, or the tricycle, and we're going to hook the shift linkage cable up, and we want to adjust the travel for the derailleur. Now the derailleur has a low end and a high end screw settings. That allows the derailleur how far it goes from one side all the way back to the other. So to make sure that we have our gears so they're adjusted correctly so the derailleur can't go too far or not far enough for each one, we put it in the chain on gear 6 and we adjust it on the low end. If we hear any clicking sounds where it's kind of like, maybe kind of sounding like that, we know it's not adjusted. This low end currently is pretty good. Now if we push on this, it'll go all the way up to the first gear, and the same way, if we hear clicking sounds like that, we know we're out of adjustment, and we would adjust one of these two screws. But currently that's sounding pretty good. We may have to do some minor adjustments, but currently I'm pretty happy with that. Alright, so we want to make sure that our shifter is now set for gear 6. So we want to make sure the shifter is set for gear 6. We also want to make sure this cable is all the way up here. And I'm going to look to make sure that this is set for gear 6. And it appears to be in gear 6. So we make sure that's all the way up. We'll come back down to this end. And we've got the other end of the cable down here. So we want to make sure we pull tight on this, make sure there's any slack in it. We've pulled it out. Now, this cable will actually feed through right about here. I don't know if you can see that or not. There's a little screw input here, and it's an adjustment screw, so you can adjust this in or out with this screw to make it so it's longer or shorter. I'm going to make it a little shorter right now. We feed the cable through there, so it just feeds all the way up through, and we want this to slide right into there nice and tight. Now I don't know if you can see this or not, but I'm going to show it to you. This screw right here, this screw is where this cable is going to slide underneath. Okay, so we've got the wire up underneath this little clip here, and you just have to have the cable pulled up tight. Use a 9mm socket or a box wrench, either one. Get that nice and tight, adjust it, and tighten that down. Alright, got the shift linkage assembly done. And now you can adjust the cable back so that you don't have extra cable hanging anywhere. Alright, for the other side, we have the brake adjustment. And brake adjustment is pretty much the same way. We have a screw that needs to be removed, a nut needs to be removed off this one bracket here that holds the brake assembly on. And you just screw that down into place. And just use an open end wrench on one side and your Allen wrench on the other side. And just tighten that up nice and firm. Then you can adjust the screw down a little bit into here. Make sure this outer cable comes all the way down. And make sure it's all the way up in place up on the handle and the brake assembly. Now, this is your actual slack adjuster that takes the slack out and it tightens the brake band. So this little notch goes right through there. Okay. You have a nut that goes on the back side. And get an idea how far you have to come out before that brake actually engages. And you might want to just tighten that up just enough to kind of snug that up a little bit. And then that's a 10mm nut. Just tighten that up. Alright. And now your brake should work, and if you hit your brake, it stops the rear axle good. Alright. And you can adjust that if you need to a little bit either direction. If you need to make the cable shorter, make the cable longer. That's what these adjustments here are for. That way you don't have to adjust the cable itself each time. That works good. Alright, so we have the back end pretty well done, except for putting the wheels on and the fenders on. Alright, so now we're going to come around to the side over here. And we can go ahead and put on the chain guard. And the chain guard is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. It's just a nice little cover that slides over. And it has 3 screws to mount it. And you will need a Phillips screwdriver for this part. So let me grab a Phillips here. And this is pretty straightforward. Just kind of line it up so it looks good. Now it's starting to look like a bike. Alright, got that tightened up. Now we're going to work on the front end here. Alright, these are the pieces you're going to need to assemble the front wheel caliper and the front fender and the front wheel. So I'm going to step this camera back a little bit so you can get an idea. Alright. Brake assembly and everything's pretty easy to install. You have your brake assembly, which just kind of fits over the rim, and there's a hole in the front axle, and that just slides in. Pretty straightforward. Now to put the fender on, the fender is going to slide down through here, and you'll see that it fits right onto that bolt. These two bolts up here will actually fit onto the axle. For a second. Okay, setting up the front wheel and the fender for the front wheel is quite easy. With these two unusual looking washers, they have a little tooth on the one side here that drops down into this hole. The reason that's there is in case these nuts would get loose, your wheel's not going to fall off. It can't fall off because that's a safety on here to keep it in place. So we'll drop those in place, and we're just going to lightly tighten these up. We're just going to tighten them by hand at this point, just so that we can get it put together here. Now for the axle, for the brake assembly, this just slides over the wheel. Now we need to set up the fender. So what we want to do is we want to put one of these washers on one side, one of these fat washers, and they're like tapered. So what they do is they taper to the post to make that set better. We drop your fender in. Has another spacer on the other side that goes there. So we'll put that in place. Slide the fender up. There is a small washer that goes on. And then you have a locking nut. So you can just start that. For the two legs up here, there's a hole right here, and there's two screws that come with that are threaded. And you'll just screw those into the two holes on the back section here of the fork. These are tightened up with a Phillips screwdriver here. And tighten those up. And you can bend this and move it around a little bit, whatever you need to do to make your adjustment. These fenders are designed to be bent a little bit so they'll fit better. Because they will get bent in shipping, stuff like that. Get that tightened up. Tighten this up down here. Once that's tightened up, then you come here to these two brake pads. They're 10 millimeter. You can just loose the bolt, kind of line them up. You want them to so they're grabbing onto the rim. So they're not crooked like that. You want them to be square to the rim. So you kind of have to hold them in place while you tighten them. And you'll do that to both sides, make sure that they're lined up. And once you get them where you want, you're good. You can also adjust your cable. And there's a little cover that can go on the back of the screw here. Kind of decorate it, make it look nice. Alright. And there again, you can adjust your cable using these adjusters. So you want to get your tires so the brakes are not too close, everything's adjusted correctly, everything's tightened correctly. Alright, the wheel goes, tire's not rubbing anywhere, fender's not rubbing, and of course if you need to adjust anything, you can just, these little brackets here can be bent so that you can get your fender lined up nice and straight, and the front wheel is set. Now it's really starting to look like a bike. Now we're going to move on to the back side, and with the back side we're going to start with the drive wheel first. You can tell the drive wheel because it has kind of an odd shape. It's not round, and that fits onto the hub here. So we'll slide this over a little bit. And we're going to take off this bolt. Now you're going to find you have multiple washers. First thing you want to do is you want to put your drive wheel on. And you want to get it lined all the way up. And you're going to have one washer that's got a knockout in it. Just put that on. And just hand tighten that up. Now, we're going to go ahead and do the other side also. So the other side, we have two washers. So when I knock that one loose, two washers. Put one washer and slide it all the way in. Okay. Now, you'll also find there is a spacer. Okay, with the spacer, and slide that on there. Now we're going to go ahead and slide this axle on. And if you can, you want to make sure that the treads go in the same direction. On this particular one, it does better. And of course, don't drop your bike off the table while you're doing it. Go ahead and put your nut on that side, or the second washer, and then put another nut on there. And let me grab a 7/8 socket. So we're just going to start to tighten this up. And since this is the drive wheel side, we're going to tighten this up pretty tight. Okay. The other side, since it is just a wheel that is freewheeling, we're not going to tighten it too tight, but we want it to be able to still move, and both of them seem to move fine. So now it's really starting to look like a bike. Fenders onto the bicycle, or onto the tricycle. We went ahead and mounted our reflector. So we're getting ready to mount the fenders onto the tricycle. And it's pretty straightforward to do this. You have a reflector that you mount with a bolt onto the fender. You also have 3 brackets. The bracket with the double hole goes in the center, and then you have brackets that have single holes that go on the outside edge. You just put your bolts straight through, so they're facing outward. And then, just slide them on the back side here. Just fit them into the grooves. And the nuts, you just screw on the back. These are 10 millimeter. So you will need a 10 millimeter box wrench and a 10 millimeter socket. And once you get these all tightened up, then you can adjust the fender. You adjust the fender by actually bending the support brackets, but it's pretty close when you get it on there. And until you get everything all adjusted, I wouldn't tighten it too much, just so it makes it easier to move it around any that you might need to move it around. Alright, so then you can make any adjustments you need to do. These brackets can bend a little bit. And once you get it all lined up, make sure your reflectors are all the same height, and you're all set with that. Next, we're going to mount the seat. Your bike seat may have already had the seat attached to the post, or it may not. If it's not been attached, you slide the post into here, and there's a nut on both sides of the seat that you would tighten up to hold the seat to the post. There's a clamp on here. Yours may have already had it mounted on it, or if it doesn't, you may just have to tap it into place. Seat just slides in. Takes a little wiggling to get it in there. There is a minimum or a maximum that you can have this post out. They'll have a line on here. You do not want to raise the seat above that because it'll make it weak. So find the height that you want it at. Give it a good turn. Make sure it's lined up straight. Tighten it up good, and you're all set there. Alright, last thing we have left to do is the basket. Okay, now we're installing the basket on it. Pretty straightforward. You assemble the basket. There's a bracket that goes across this bar and across this bar that has holes in it. You run 2 bolts down through it, and you just center those up, get them where you want them. And they've got lock nuts on them that you don't have to get it too tight, just tight enough to kind of hold it in place. And you do the same thing with the front 2 bolts. And once you get those done, you have 2 caps that you put on the wheels for decoration, just to kind of make it look nice. They just pop on. Got one for both sides. And your trike is now ready to go for a ride. Now you will want to make some adjustments, check your brakes and everything before you try it out. So you can make sure you stop, make sure everything's tight, double check everything, and then, make any adjustments you need to your brakes or to your gears.